This summer represented 10 years for me to be a part of this church, be a part of Journey Church. And I'm really excited. I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but Will, I came to work for Will at Charlotte North Fellowship. That was 10 years ago in a summer. And I started then. I love our church. I love everything about our church. Doesn't mean that our church has been is great or perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Doesn't mean that all the years that I've been here have been easy years or easy times. But I do love our church, and I've grown to love. Listen, I'm 41 years old. I've grown to love the local church. Now, I have to be honest, I can't say that about my whole life. For some of you that doesn't know my story, but I've been at church since before I was born. Let me just ask this question so that I know. How many of you were raised in church? Like as a kid, you were raised in church? That's good. That's a good number. We had a lot more in the first service, but that's a good number to kind of represent what I'm talking about. You'll understand this. I didn't always love the church. I struggled with some of the issues as a kid. I just struggled with, as I was bored and I laugh. Parents come tell me all the time, their teenager has to come to service and they're like, man, our kids just really don't like big church. We're just like, hey, that's okay. And I just have no sympathy for you because you have no idea the church I sat through as a child. You know what I'm trying to say? They didn't even have this stuff in college. They didn't have this kind of cool experience in high school. And our youth group sang Pharaoh, Pharaoh. How many remember that song, right? Okay, so that's what I'm trying to say. Like for me, I look at it and go, I haven't always enjoyed it. I haven't always loved it. As a matter of fact, in my early young adult years, I made kind of a vow. I made kind of a commitment that I was never going to work for a church. I enjoyed going. I was serving, but I was never going to work for one. I saw too much pain, too many issues, too many kind of the dark side, the ugly side of kind of the brokenness of the church. And so I wasn't going to do it. And obviously, God changed my heart. I can't give you all my story today, but God changed my heart. And over the last 17 years, been growing just incredibly, not just in love with Journey as I've been a part of it, but just in love with the local church. And so I'm just giving to you right up front. This is the bottom line of where we're going to stay today and where we're going today is this idea that despite its many issues, the local church is still the most important institution in our country and therefore the world. All right? That despite its brokenness, and listen, I'm telling you, the church has so many places where we're broken because you and I are broken people. All right? We have so many places, so many issues in the church that we shouldn't have because you and I have issues we shouldn't have. Right? That's just a representation in terms of the church. But despite all of those things, there is nothing, I don't believe there's anything more important than the influence and the impact that the local church has on neighborhoods, families, communities, cities, and our country, and therefore in every country, is the local church. Why? Because, and this is just a great quote that I've used before, but this is a quote from a guy named Bill Hybels, pastor of almost 40 years now. He says the local church is the hope of the world. And we love that word around here, hope, right? We love that word around here because that is true for us. That no matter where you go, no matter what you do, no matter what area and avenue you are in life, everybody wants to be hopeful. Everybody wants that thing that they don't feel like they can achieve, but they want to walk towards it. They want to experience pieces of it. And Bill Hybels just said, that's fine. I want you to know from a big picture into a little picture that the local church is the hope of the world because of what God is doing to build the church. Now, we talk about the word institution because institution is true. Most people think of churches as like Journey Church of Lake Norman, nonprofit institution, right? Because churches are gatherings, kind of organized, if you will, gatherings. So I do want you to understand, I do value the institution of it, but it's because I value the church that Christ talked about, the church that God intended, which is really better kind of put this way. This is kind of the definition of when I say local church, it is a local gathering, right, of transformed people, empowered by Jesus Christ to reach every man, woman, and child with his gospel. Right, that's really what it is. The church itself at its core is you and me and you and me and you and me. Just empowered. Transformed, I don't want you to think that we've arrived anywhere. We're being transformed, right? It's transforming people. And empowered by Christ to reach the people around us. That's Journey's vision, right? Our big picture vision is that we want to see every one of your friends' stories changed by absolute hope. Which is what drives our mission, right? Drives our mission statement that Journey Church exists to humbly point everyone to absolute hope. That's why it's our mission. And we were very, very specific to have a mission as a church that wasn't kind of, organizationally centric. right? Where we as a church are going to raise up, armies for God and people and help them with I've heard all sorts of church mission statements, right? We're going to raise up our church mission statement is simply a representation of what we believe we individually are called to do, right? We believe we individually are called to be transformed out in our community where we live, work, and play, reaching every man, woman, child, everyone's stories around us with the absolute hope of Jesus Christ. And the only way that our church corporately does that is because you and me individually do it. You and I don't know how to say that properly, right? And so we are the ones responsible to do that, right? And so I understand, even as I talk about this, my goal this morning is just simply to kind of impart on you, pass off to you, not just my gratitude for the church, but just why. Why is it so important? If I look at my life, okay, not just the first 15 years of Journey, but the first 15 years for me, the next 15 years beyond that, I think about just me growing up in a church. I can't really imagine, I guess I kind of can, but it's hard for me sometimes to imagine what my life would look like if you were to remove the influence and the impact that the local churches had on me. Now, because I am in touch with my dark side, I understand where I probably would be, right? I understand with the old flesh and the old man that's in me that I could probably not spend too much time thinking about it and thinking, well, I don't know if I would have made it 41 years, number one, but number two, I can guarantee you my life would look drastically different. Drastically different if you were to remove everything. I'm talking about everything from preschool flannel board story time. You guys remember story time, flannel board? Yeah, from that to Awanas to youth group, even Rockin' Pharaoh. I'm talking about all of it, right? Sunday school, young married, Sunday school class. You guys are so blessed not to have Sunday school, that's all I'm saying. Anyway, young married, Sunday school class. All of it. If you were to remove that from me, I'm just telling you, my life would look so different. And it's what God has done in and through the local church in my life that I'm incredibly grateful for today. And I just want to pass some of this on. About 4 or 5 months ago, our staff was at a family conference down in Atlanta, and I got to hear Reggie Joyner and Andy Stanley. They were both speaking, and they shared some of the ideas I'm going to share with you this morning. They shared some of this just from their heart and their own personal experience. And I remember writing notes and just taking down some of the big points and saying, and I told Don at that moment, I was like, I want to share this on our 15-year anniversary. Like this, it was just God gave it through them, and I said, I just want to share it from my experience because it resonated so much with how I felt. I said, I want to be able to share this, and I've added some things that are more personal to me as well, but I want to just share this with you. Again, the impact of what only I feel like the local church can do because of God working in and through his people. Now, let me just walk through these fairly quickly. The first one is this. It really did inform my conscience. All right, and I say that meaning the true word. It informed my conscience. It's my morals, my right and wrong, my ethics, my values. The church had a huge influence in informing those and kind of bringing me about what was right, what was wrong. I'm just walking through some of the memory of forgiveness, why forgiveness was so important in my life. Not just the 3 strikes and you're out kind of forgiveness, but the 70 times 7, as Jesus would say, kind of forgiveness. I'm talking about the kind of forgiveness that doesn't have almost anything to do with the person who's offended me, but has everything to do with me not holding on to bitterness and poison and hatred in my heart, and how free it is for me to learn to forgive others. Right? That's what I remember learning. I remember learning about purity as a young adult and a young man who was not interested in purity at all, okay? I remember learning about purity, how it would pave the way, and it would really produce intimacy in my life. And if I would just honor God with my body, if I would just honor God with my thoughts, that it would prove to be one of the greatest decisions I can make in my future marriages and my relationships. I remember not just forgiveness, but just the idea of reconciling relationships. That if I have a problem with someone else, if I'm dealing with somebody else, that it's not just okay for me to kind of go, okay, God, sorry I did that. But if I have the opportunity, I'm to go make it right. I'm to go to them and make it right and work through the reconciliation if it's possible with other people. I saw people experience and live out a model for me what faith looked like. To live with a confidence of things that are unseen. With an assurance of what God said is to come. I remember seeing people live that out, and it was just modeled and transferred to me through the collection, through that gathering of God's people in the local church. I remember being taught what it looked like to confess sin, and really not just to God, but really understanding that confessing sin one to another, as James would say, was a place in which I would experience healing from that sin. This was all given to me, guys, from the local church, the influence and the impact of the local church. And this is why it's kind of important to me that people, not fall into this rut and culture of, well, I'll try to make it to church when I can, and you're hitting a 10 and 12 and 20 times a year kind of cycle. It's important to have consistency in your life. It's important to have consistency for not just you, but for the next generation, for your kids. All right, your kids, this is what's at stake, because the local church has this incredible influence in being able to infer in them and instill in them and inform their conscience and the values. And I'm honest, I'm so happy to have a church like Journey to partner with in terms of my kids. Listen, what other organization will you ever go to, will you ever bring your family to, where you can hand your kids off to volunteers, not people who are working a job, but volunteers who feel called and purpose to pour into your children to reinforce the values and character traits you're trying to already teach at home? Where else are you going to do that? It's not school. It's not sports. It's not the other programs. Where else are you going to find that other than the local church? You can bring your family together. You can bring them together and say, they're going to reinforce some of the values I'm trying to already, at my wit's end, teach my kids. I'm so thankful for the local church. So thankful for that alone. If that was the only thing it did, it's powerful enough. But there's more. Second thing I know that it did is it reframed my life's purpose. It taught me this idea of destiny, and not just from a cultural perspective of destiny is what you make it, or to live on purpose, live life on purpose, but a sense of destiny that went beyond me. That it wasn't just what I wanted to do, and like schools often do. Schools look at your talents and your abilities and your capacity, and then they try to form your life's direction based on those things. But to be a part of a local body of believers, be a part of a local church where they talked about the fact that God made me on purpose for a purpose. That He has something planned for you. That as a young person, you can actually ask Him big questions like, who am I to date? Where am I supposed to go work? What kind of careers am I going to have? Where am I move here and do this? That I can actually ask Him that. Why? Because He's got a purpose for my life. And that purpose goes beyond my talents and abilities and capacities. But that there's a Holy Spirit at work in me, and He's given me gifts, and He's given me passion and compassion to live out in the purpose of my life. Reframed for me the identity of having something beyond me to live for. Where else are you going to find that than the local church? Third thing it did was it fostered my lifelong friendships. And this is just true. Even not just as a kid. As a kid, it was powerful. I still have friends that I'm in constant contact with that I grew up with in church. When I was back, I can't tell you how many times I got called down from in church, in the middle of church, because my parents, they were both always serving. My dad was leading music, and my mom was always serving somewhere. And I was, 10-year-old with my other 10-year-old friend sitting in the back row somewhere, drawing on the back of the pew and other things that we did, just those kind of things. And how many times we'd get called down. I was in trouble all the time, right? I can't tell you, though, the friends that I made. I'm thinking of Chad right now, Chad Millick, the one that I sat beside of and caused so much trouble at New Testament Baptist Church in Canada, that we are still connected through Instagram. And I guarantee you, when we get to see each other, it's like time has not passed. Fostering lifelong friendships. For me, even as an adult, doing life with other people, doing life groups, these are some of the closest friends I have in my life. You guys may remember David McNeely, who was one of our teaching pastors, right? David McNeely and Scott Worley. You don't know Scott very well, but these two guys I met while serving at a church 17 years ago in Lexington, North Carolina, and they are some of my closest friends to date because of just being able to come around not even the same interests. I don't even know how they put up with me, because I don't follow sports, and they struggle so hard with that all the time when they talk. It's not even common interests that align us. It's a common person of Jesus Christ and the purposes of our life that bring us together and foster some of the closest friendships you will ever have. That's just, again, one of the things I believe the local church does. My kids, for the last 10 years, some of their closest friends are because of Journey Church. Not because of school, not because of their neighborhood, because they come to church every week. They go to camp. They experience life together through the way in which we are able to foster those relationships that they're going to have for life. Here's the fourth thing I believe it did. It shaped my global worldview. It shaped for me that global worldview, that understanding that, listen, not everything in the world happens the way I see it in my little suburban bubble, right? Not everything happens in the way that I see it. And it started when I was younger. I just want you to know. It started when I was younger. I didn't get to go on a global mission trip until I was much later in life. But I did grow up in a church that had consistently, I don't know if you guys remember this. Tell me if you were a part of this church. 1 week a year in the spring usually was a revival week, right? Every year. We needed a revival every year. That was a 1 week every year. And the other week in the fall was, you guys know what it is? Missions for a whole week, right? With slide projectors and bed sheets. How many know what I'm talking about with a slide projector, right? Little click, 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 right? And they're talking and they're trying to share with you. And I'm telling you, even at that time, I hated going all week long to church. I hated it. But I'm telling you, even in that moment, something was getting through to me as a young person that life was not just what I saw out of my eyes and my bubble in my world. But that there were people all over the world, all over the globe, worshiping Jesus, loving who Jesus is, living in a way that doesn't make any sense to me because they have so much less stuff, but they have so much more joy. And I didn't understand that. And I began to learn it and see it fostered, and then be able to go on some of our global experiences that we have as a church. I mean, they shape my worldview to help me see who God is to everyone. Tell me another organization. Just tell me in your mind, think about it. What other organization is going to do that for you? Help shape that in your life. Here's the fifth one. Is it instilled in me a heart of generosity? It instilled in me a heart of generosity. And I don't say this to brag. I want you to hear that clearly. But as I was thinking about this, and this was one of those things that they said that just resounded in me. It's so hard to teach generosity to adults. I'm just letting you know as a pastor, it's just so difficult. Everybody understands giving. Generosity is not the same as giving. Giving is like you see a need, someone asks you, and you give something to it. It's the Salvation Army. It's things at Christmas time. It's stuff for Haiti. Like Americans are known well for the fact that we will give, right? We will see a need and a call, and we'll give. I'm talking about living a life of generosity, that it instilled in me what was initially a chore, where it was initially a have to as a child. I have never lived on 100% of my income, ever. I have never, ever experienced what it was like that everything I received, I thought was for me. Because as a child, I began to learn what it was like to live a life that was generous, to constantly give back to God, to understand that what we were given was blessed by Him for the purpose of blessing others. And what that looked like in my life, again, going from a kid of a have to a I get to or I want to, and then being even older, now that I'm older, being able to see the impact that just the little bit that I'm able to put back into the kingdom has in the world. It's so difficult to teach that. I'm telling you, that is something that the church fosters and instills in us, is a heart of generosity. That when Jesus said it is better to give than to receive, that is not a Christmas time. You know, that's not, because at Christmas time, I just gonna be honest, I enjoy receiving at Christmas time, right? And you listen to that verse, is better to give than receive, you're like, I don't know, it's pretty darn just probably equal, right? It's probably equal. But the reality for you and I is that Jesus was really talking about the fact that it is better to have a life that is driven by giving. Giving of your time, giving of your attention, giving of your resources and your money, giving of all those things that you hold most precious, to be in a position in your heart to give it away. Because He in turn is going to bless you beyond measure. It's never always been dollar for dollar. It's never always been tit for tat. It's always been more in some other way and shape and form, which God's blessed me. And if I could get all the money back right now, I wouldn't want it. I haven't missed it. Listen, you do not miss money you give back to God. You do not miss it. You're not frustrated over it. You have made a pre-decision. That's what generosity is. It's to pre-decide you're going to live this kind of life. And it's very difficult. Again, it's very difficult. That's why we want to teach the kids early in life to do that. Here's one of the last things. is that I was beginning to learn that grace is for everyone. Now, I can't look back at any particular church that I felt like had it all together and did it all perfectly well, because that's just not the way churches are, right? But I saw elements of it in every one of the churches that I was a part of, elements and people that were elders and teachers and coaches and Awana teachers and small group leaders. I saw it lived out through so many different people that grace is for everyone. I believe that when I came to CNF, to Charlotte North Fellowship, it was one of the times in my life, not only did I need grace the most, but I experienced it the most from a church. And I wanted that to be the foundation of our church, even as we continued on. The grace is for everyone, not just people who look like me and think like me and believe what I believe. One of the greatest things I ever learned was that you did not have to believe in Jesus to start following Jesus. You didn't have to. Look at the disciples. None of them knew who he was. None of them believed everything he said, and yet they began to take steps to follow him. Why? Because grace is for everyone. Grace is for anyone who is willing to receive it and take steps towards it. Please don't confuse grace with a culture, okay, with a culture of tolerance and just no judgment. Okay? Don't confuse grace with our current cultures, like we're just not going to judge anybody and we're going to be tolerant of everything. I promise you, if we fall for that instead of grace, we are going to live our lives to the lowest common denominator. The lowest common call in our lives will be just to have tolerance and not judge anyone. Because here's what grace is. Grace acknowledges that there's a higher standard. Grace acknowledges that there's a higher calling. Grace acknowledges and inspires us to be more and to live more. And yet, grace also tells us that we can't get there, but yet it's freely given to us. The fullness of it is freely given to us if we're willing to accept it from Christ. That has to be the part of the church that people experience that they can't really explain. Oh, is it a church of, is there an aspect of tolerance? Sure. Is there an aspect of no judgment? Sure. But the reality is that what other organization in the world can I walk into, because we're all acceptance magnets, what other organization can I walk into and be accepted where I am for who I am right now? Because grace is for everyone who is willing to take that step and receive it. Who else represents the acceptance of one of God's creation than the church that honors the Creator? That is just a huge, huge difference in the local church and the influence and impact it makes. Now, when Jesus talked about the church, he only talked about it twice. And it wasn't because he didn't think the church was, he knew. He didn't think that the church wasn't valuable. It's just that Jesus was laying a foundation of understanding what God's movement was like on earth, and that the power of his kingdom, because he talked about the kingdom all the time, the power of the kingdom of God was going to fuel everything. And as people would be transformed, as people would come to know him, as people would begin to take steps towards to follow Christ, they would become the church. The church was a result. It didn't start with the church. And it was so great in this one moment when Jesus was talking. It was a time in which Jesus was kind of getting a little more well-known. And he asked his disciples, he said, well, who do people say that I am? Who do they say that I am? And they're all saying, well, some think you're a good teacher. Some think you're a prophet, either reincarnated or maybe a new prophet. Some people decide that. And he decides to ask right away, okay, who do you say that I am? This is a great moment even for Simon Peter, who in Matthew 16, it says, Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus replied, you are blessed, Simon and John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. Keep going. You did not learn this from any human being. That's something God gave you. Now I say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock, right, upon this declaration, I will build my church, and all of the powers of hell will not overcome it. I love this particular verse because if you know Peter's story, Peter is one who denied Christ. He betrayed him, and as a friend and as a rabbi and as a follower, he betrayed him in one of the worst ways you can. And he looked at Peter in this moment and said, look, I want you to know something. I want you to understand the truth. I'm going to build my church. That's his word for ecclesia. The Germans, a German word came in and said the word church there, but it's really better to say kind of a gathering of people, a movement of people. Jesus says, Peter, on this declaration that you've made, because you're Peter, and Jesus probably would have said, you are such a screw up and you know it, right? You are so broken and you know it. You are going to continue to fail that you don't even know it, but I know it. I'm telling you on the declaration you just made, what was given to you by God, I'm going to build my people. And the powers and the gates of hell will not overcome them. And guess what? They haven't. And they won't. That's why I'm listen, when I talk about the next 15 years of Journey, I don't talk about the next 15 years with any type of confidence in you. You're all just as messed up as I am, right? I talk about it with confidence that the reality is if we continue to be the church that God called us to be, if we continue to be the followers of Christ that God called us to be, if we continue to do what the church can only do, some of those 6 things plus more that are probably in your mind, if we continue to do what the church, the gathering, the ecclesia, he's called us to be, and we continue to do those things, we're going to be here. I am so not worried. It has nothing to do with how awesome you are. It has everything to do with how awesome he is. And I wrote this down just as I was praying this past summer, and I know I shared this with some of you, but as I prayed this past summer about the vision of our church and the mission of our church and the heartbeat of our church, and God, what do you want for the next 15 years? And I was praying about that's where the first 15, next 15 kind of language came from, is my sabbatical this summer. I wrote down something that I wrote it down because I believe God said it very clearly, and I wanted to hold on to it until today. Just so that we could all be in agreement and understand this is where I come from in terms of my heart. That the next 15 years, listen, what we do as a church will never be more important than us being the church in Lake Norman. What we do as an institutional group, as a gathering of organized gathering of believers, it will never surpass, it will never be more important than us being the church in our families, in our neighborhoods, in our cities, in our communities in Lake Norman. Never. We still have our goals. Yeah, we want to plant, we're working at the Denver, we're trying to plant it in January. That's our goal, is to plant this campus, have it starting weekly meetings in January. That's our goal with that. We want to continue to see 3,000 stories changed. We're well on our way to see that. We're wanting to continue to do $300,000. Those are the mile markers, you've heard us talk about. The mile markers that tells us we're in the right direction, that we're following God, and there's lots of other things on the table, things we're talking about possibly doing. But just hear me. What hinges on Journey being here 15 years later with a healthy church growing and seeing lives changed is whether or not you and me are being the church. Has nothing to do with what we do. Has nothing to do with the big things we plan or do or accomplish. Has everything to do with you and me understanding what it looks like to live it out and to be those transformed people where we live, work, and play, reaching everyone in our circles, and pointing them to absolute hope. What does being the church look like? Well, the local church inspires us to embrace the one thing that can change everything. Right? Like, regardless of the political season we're in right now, you and I have the command, we have the mandate, we have the secret key answer to it all. We have the one thing of what it looks like to be the church, to be the local body, this ecclesia of gathering of people. We have the one thing that can change everything in our families, in our neighborhoods, in our cities, in our communities, in our country. What is that? This is in, I think it's John, right? Matthew? No, this is John. It's a new command I give you. This is Jesus' words. Love one another. Just say those 3 words with me. Love one another. One more time. Say it again. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. That's what being the church looks like. Now, we're starting a new series in the next week, and we're going to talk about some massive big topic things. We're calling it Questions Without Answers. It's a big topic series. And I'll be honest, it's tough stuff. We're going to start off talking about racism and bias and prejudice, and then we're going to go right on to LGBTQ community and agendas and so forth and so on, especially in our city and especially how it affects everything that's going on. We're going to end right before election. We're going to end right before the election, all about politics and the church and the state and how it all comes together. I mean, my goal in 3 weeks is to offend everyone. I'm going to let you know. That's what's going to happen, right? We're diving straight in the deep end of all those topics. Why? Why? Guys, why? Because in those areas specifically, the church is not known for how we love one another. That's just the way it is. The church is not known in those things for how we love one another. And I can't express this probably passionately enough, but the same way that Jesus would say this new command to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and the second is equal to it, which is love your neighbor as much as yourself. When he says everything in the Old Testament and New Testament hinges on this, I'm telling you that when you think about the next 15 years of Journey, when you think about this church that you love, when you think about the way in which we've desired to do things and see things happen in the community, that's all amazing. But where the hinge is, where the axis is for us to love one another. That the next 15 years really does rest on whether or not we're going to be the church. Because that's the call. To be the church. That God desires to be the church, this group, this gathering of people that God wants to use to not just transform people, but to point people to hope, to point people to the reality of what life can look like. To help shape our consciences, to help move us in a direction of purpose in our life, to give us a heart of generosity, to bring about the friendships and connections that we all need and desire and want, and to help us not just experience the grace that we all need, but be able to give it away. I love in that verse when he says, look, as I have loved you, so you're to love one another. And I fail at it. I fail every time I compare how much I love people to how much he loves me. Because that's the measuring stick. The measuring stick is how much he loves me. Is what I've been given to now give away. To live my life out from and to be the church he's called us to be. Would you guys stand with me this morning? Here's what I want to do. I want to sing in response this morning. Because this is going to take not just a program, this is not just one sermon, kind of a one-off thing we're going to talk over the next 3 weeks, but it's going to take everything we have. Everything we have to pray to God, to say, God, continue, because I believe we've had that as an underlying mission of our church, but God, would you continue to call you and me and everyone in this room to be the church that God would have us be? And then we're going to sing and worship and respond together. Let's do that this morning. God, we thank you for today. We thank you for the way your word challenges us, inspires us, pours out its love and grace on us. God, it's for the purpose that we wouldn't just receive it, and we wouldn't just experience it, but God, that we would pour it out to others. God, I'm so thankful for the local church. God, I'm so thankful for what you have done, even just in my life. And now I'm seeing it in my kids' lives through healthy local churches, healthy expressions of your grace and love. God, would you just continue in Journey Church, because that's where we are. That's this group that we're talking to. It's a part of the bigger group. It's a part of the bigger ecclesia that you said you were going to build. God, thank you for that. But as this church gathers, God, I pray that we would, in our individual own hearts, pray for you to come into us and to help us in every way, shape, and form with everything. Become the church that you would have us be. And to live out that one thing that changes everything. If we would just love one another. God, we confess where we don't do this well, and we pray that only by your grace and power, you could do it through us. In your name, Jesus. Amen.